I'm John Heilemann.
And I'm Mark Halperin. With all due respect to the English-only crowd, you should have heard Jeb Bush today in Puerto Rico. On the show tonight, the Supreme Court bench and Jeb Bush in the trench. But first, the protests. Baltimore's curfew goes back into effect at 10 p.m. tonight. The Maryland National Guard is still being deployed, and conditions remain so fraught that tomorrow's Orioles-White Sox baseball game will be played at Camden Yards with no fans present. At a White House press conference today with Japan's Prime Minister, President Obama was asked to weigh in not just on Baltimore, but on the nation's other recent racially charged incidents. The president had strong words for both violent protesters and for law enforcement.
When individuals get crowbars and start prying open doors to loot, they're not protesting. They're not making a statement. They're stealing. It's going to be important for organizations like the Fraternal Order Police and other police unions and organizations to acknowledge that this is not good for police. I can't federalize every police force in the country and force them to retrain, but what I can do is to start working with them collaboratively so that they can begin this process of change themselves.
All right, so John, given the continuing run of police-related violence in America, is today's response from the president enough?
In a word, Mark, I think the answer is no. I don't know that Barack Obama in any way can, with a wave of his magic wand, solve this problem. It's deeply enshrined in America, in big cities, small cities, any place where there are white police forces and communities of color. But I have to say, it's such a huge problem. The problem of criminal justice reform, trying to deal with the mass incarceration of African Americans largely in this country, the disparities in sentencing, all that stuff that feeds into this atmosphere that's created the problems in Ferguson, the problem in Baltimore, the problem in New York City. It is a huge problem the whole country has to take on, and I don't think President Obama has done nearly enough to lead on it in the time he's been in office.
I don't think he has, but and today he was not particularly passionate, although he did give a very long answer, a 6-point answer, and clearly is thinking a lot about it. He's got a new attorney general he can deploy. I believe that this is a classic case of where Washington can't solve the problem. They can help, but mayors and governors, first and foremost, have to get on this. And in Baltimore, you've got a well-meaning, prominent African-American mayor, and I think she's done a horrible job in dealing with this, not just in the recent events, but when her city was dealing with a legislation that would put body cameras on cops. She did not do enough to get it passed in a timely fashion. So I think the president could do more, but I think the most important thing is the mayors and governors do more.
Well, I agree with that 100%. There's no doubt that that the primary responsibility for law enforcement is at the state level. But there is a federal justice system. And the federal justice system right now, the disparities between sentences for crack cocaine versus regular cocaine and the racial disparities that leads to, and a wide variety of other things that feed into this problem, mass incarceration that creates the racial tensions that we see play out. This is something where the federal government can take the lead, even if it can't solve the problem.
And I can't help but think that Bill Clinton would go 45 minutes down the road to Baltimore if he were president.
Right. I totally agree. Those of us not lucky enough to be in the Supreme Court today, we're busy scouring SCOTUS blog for all the details of the gay marriage oral arguments. The audio has been released, and we'll have some of that later. Leading up to today, the conventional wisdom was that it was more or less a foregone conclusion that there were at least 5 and maybe even 6 votes in favor of enshrining same-sex marriage as the law of the land. So, Mark, now that you've reviewed and we've reviewed what went down in the court today, do you think it is still the case that it is a foregone conclusion?
Reading tea leaves is kind of silly. And if you're looking to figure this out, it's either going to be 5-4 or 6-3. If it's 5-4, it could go either way, obviously. I still think that if you look at the history of what Justice Kennedy has done on these issues, I still think they're going to have 5 votes at least. And I still think there's a possibility they get Justice Roberts.
People wildly misunderstand the nature of oral arguments in the Supreme Court. The justices are asking questions. You see someone like Justice Roberts today who asked questions that seem to suggest that he thinks this should remain in the political realm at the state level. At the same time, he raised the question of whether this was not just a straightforward matter of sexual discrimination. He's asking questions to tease out answers and to persuade people who are his colleagues on the court. These are not just expressions of their opinions. They are asking questions in a strategic and tactical way. You can see certain things from what they're asking. If you got a Justice Scalia, you can read his tea leaves pretty easily. But these guys in the middle, much, much harder to know.
The fact that the justices who are going to vote against further expansion of rights for gay and lesbians to get married, the fact that all of them are conservative and locked in is representative of the divide in America. Too much of the media coverage today and of the arguments today is rooting for the court to overturn this, and there are millions of Americans on that side too. But in the end, I think the simplest thing to look at, as I said before, is Justice Kennedy's history on these issues. He is not afraid to be an activist judge, and he clearly is not afraid to say that public opinion and civil rights and taking things out of the realm of politics is perfectly fine. Like I said, I think it's 5-4, and I think it could be 6-3 in favor of expansion.
And I'll say quickly, I totally agree with you, and I think the thing is Justice Kennedy would have a hard time intellectually squaring his past decisions if he were to deviate from those now.
Exactly. All right, moving on. Jeb Bush, over the last couple days, corralled in Florida some of his biggest donors. The program included some very well-received and well-reviewed remarks from Jeb's Mexican-born wife, Columba. And today, Jeb Bush himself left the continental United States for the territorial United States, namely Puerto Rico. There, he was flaunting his Latino cred, and if you haven't ever heard Jeb Bush speak Spanish, now is a good time to get a start.
I got to come down here. I campaigned in almost every municipio. I met the entire Comité Central de todos los municipios del PNP. I became for 3 months, I think I may have become a resident of Puerto Rico. Trust me, I know the power of the immigrant experience because I live it each and every day. I know the immigrant experience because I married a beautiful girl from Mexico. My children are bicultural and bilingual.
In the Q&A with the press, he also spoke English and Spanish. Obviously, it's often cast Jeb Bush as having a problem because of his position on immigration. But if you take his speaking of Spanish, you take his wife's potential as a surrogate, John, my question to you is, can Jeb Bush make his appeal to Latino voters a net plus in the nomination fight, despite his position on immigration?
Yeah, I think he can, Mark, and I know that I'm outside the conventional wisdom here, and I'm going to bet you are too. I think that for Republicans who want to win the White House, if that is the main thing they want to win, they look at the electoral map and they say, if we don't solve our problem with Hispanics, we can't win a majority and we can't win the White House. And Jeb Bush, Marco Rubio, some others, mostly those two, though, are the best chances they have of breaking that. It's really important for them to get over 30, 35, up to 40% of Hispanics, and Jeb Bush has a good chance of doing that, maybe the best chance among all Republicans. And I think the electability argument plays to his favor, and that's how it helps him.
I think Jeb Bush is going to have a powerful electability argument to make. I disagree with you. I think the immigration thing is so overwhelmingly negative that while he can cut into it by showing he's got this appeal, I don't think he can make it a net plus. I think he'll make his electability argument successfully other ways. But speaking Spanish, talking about immigration, showing he's got appeal in Puerto Rico and with Latinos elsewhere, I just don't think that's going to be a net plus within the nomination fight, as much as rationally it should be.
Well, I think, look, you and I are on the opposite sides here. I think especially if this is a long nomination fight, if this thing goes on, it's not determined by Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, and we end up getting to big states and Super Tuesday states in places like California where there are a lot of Hispanic voters and a fair number of them will vote in those Republican primaries. I think it's going to help him, not just in terms of electability, I think that could also help him in terms of raw vote count.
They're not going to vote much in the Republican primary. His best chance is to appeal to suburban voters with it. All right.
There'll be some.
Coming up, our man in Baltimore, Dave Weigel, updates us on the situation there. And then all the sound and fury on tape from inside the Supreme Court's arguments today, right after this. We're joined now from Baltimore by our colleague Dave Weigel, who got to the city last night He's been taking pictures and video, talking to folks and writing and tweeting all day. Dave, thanks for joining us. First question for you is, tell us just from a textured point of view, what have you seen since you've been on the ground in Baltimore that strikes you?
I saw a majority of people in Baltimore wanting to be peaceful, taking out to the stoops, the streets, talking amongst themselves, and really distraught at the looting that was going on. I saw a minority of people looting. I did see it. It was fairly brazen at a couple points last evening, people taking the opportunity to run to Rite Aid, run to CVS. And I saw a few cars set on fire. But one thing I was trying to convey with my reporting was that if you refer to this as a city on fire, you're talking about a couple of discrete blocks, not about the entire city. And you saw today, in the follow-up today, the conversations today, a lot of regret and attempts to move forward.
Dave, who do you, from the people you've spoken to since you've been there, where do people place the blame? Who are they holding responsible? Where do they see as the source of the injustice that's in their minds taking place?
For the situation they're in, they blame the police entirely. They say that the police system here, as reporters have found, has been paying out enormous settlements because of abuses, has been getting away, they feel, literally with murder. For the rioting, they share some of the blame with the mayor, a little bit with the governor. I mean, I found a lot of people who, in all likelihood, used to support the mayor of this city, saying that she waited too long to set up safeguards to prevent rioting, that after Saturday's riots, she should have scrambled faster. And confusion that the curfew that's going to start tonight didn't start a night earlier, because I was out until 3 a.m., and by that point, the city was literally out of fire trucks to stop all the fires that have been happening from people roaming the streets.
Dave, you mentioned the curfew. I'm curious about what the mood is there now with that curfew about to be imposed. Do you think the curfew will hold? Is there a sense that people are going to be defiant about it? What's the vibe there on that front?
There's optimism. I mean, I spent a little bit of time today at the CVS that was burned yesterday, the one that we all saw with the TV chopper filming. People were volunteering and cleaning it up. I talked to people who literally walked in or ran off the street to join this cleanup effort around a police barricade, legally, but around the police barricade, and singing Amazing Grace, singing James Brown songs. There was a small brawl that broke out very quickly but very violently, started by just 2 people in a crowd of maybe 600. But you saw how quickly something could flash. You see, I don't think anything's changed where the majority of the city really wants to move on. I think you have to separate Baltimore from some of the other cities that have gone through this unrest. This is a city that's been Democratic since the 60s, that's been governed by black mayors with the exception of Martin O'Malley for decades, and there's more of a sense of ownership of the city than you'll see in some places. There is a huge sentiment that the city just needs to move on. A lot of religious leaders working manfully, handing out food, organizing rallies to make that happen.
Dave, you've got, as you said, a Democratic African-American mayor, Stephanie Rawlings-Blake, who said something a few days ago that has caused a lot of controversy. You've got a Republican governor. Often in these situations, you can have tension, whether they're from different parties or not, between a mayor and a governor. How is the working relationship in dealing with this crisis between those two people, as best you can tell?
I mean, it's been bitter in public. Neither of them has made much of an effort. They're both not politicians who people expected to hold those jobs just a year ago. I mean, the governor was elected in an upset with low Democratic turnout, especially in Baltimore. The mayor took over after a scandal engulfed the previous mayor, who herself had inherited the job after Martin O'Malley left. So there's not a lot of faith from the public in either of these people, and they're being tested in a way that they haven't been expected to. There was even, I found skepticism last night that the National Guard being sent here, which the governor had discussed, was even happening because people didn't see it.
Would you say that the governor is rising to the occasion? He's just new in office and not a very well-known figure even in the state.
There's more. That really depends on the curfew tonight. Based on last night, the sentiment I heard was that everyone should have moved sooner. He didn't get a lot of credit for getting National Guard ready on such short notice or scrambling in the days beforehand waiting for the order. He didn't get credit yet. I think he gets credit, and I think maybe some of the bitterness gets away from the mayor if tonight's quiet. But I'm not going to make bets until we see if the curfew works.
All right. Dave Weigel, whose work, print and photo all over our website, BloombergPolitics.com. Dave, stay safe in Baltimore. Keep the reporting coming. Thanks. All right, and after the break, what Chief Justice John Roberts and his cohorts on the court said about same-sex marriage in the Supreme Court today, we got them all on tape right after this.
Landmark cases at the Supreme Court are like Vin Scully calling a doubleheader. You know you're in for a long haul, but you savor every word of it. We're going to play some of the best bites from inside the High Court's oral arguments on gay marriage today, joined by our man at the court, Greg Stohr. Let's start with what was said by Justice Anthony Kennedy, who many consider to be the crucial swing vote in this particular case and on this issue.
One of the problems is when you think about these cases, you think about words or cases, and the word that keeps coming back to me in this case is millennia plus time. First of all, there has not been really time, so the respondents say, for the federal system to engage in this debate, the separate states. But on a larger scale, it was about the same time between Brown and Loving as between Lawrence and this case. It's about 10 years. And so there's time for the scholars and the commentators and the bar and the public to engage in it. But still 10 years is, I don't even know how to count the decimals when we talk about millennia. This definition has been with us for millennia. And it's very difficult for the court to say, oh, well, we know better.
Greg, Justice Kennedy is someone who people who are on the pro-gay marriage side have counted on as a safe vote, more or less, in this case. And there he was expressing what seems to be a pretty deep skepticism about changing the definition of the law changing the definition of marriage. Listening to him today, do you think Justice Kennedy is still a safe vote for gay marriage?
Well, yes, I think he is a highly likely vote for same-sex marriage based on what he's done in the past. He has written all three of the court's big gay rights decisions over the past 20 years. He was on the court over the last several months as it let more than a dozen states start same-sex marriage. And it would be a real shift for him to go back and say, no, I've changed my mind. I'm not going to be the champion of gay rights that I have been in the past.
Greg, let's move on to Socrates, also known as the Chief Justice, John Roberts, also closely watched. He had tough questions, as is often the case for both sides.
You say join in the institution. The argument on the other side is that they're seeking to redefine the institution. Every definition that I looked up prior to about a dozen years ago defined marriage as unity between a man and a woman as husband and wife. Obviously, if you succeed, that core definition will no longer be operable. Counsel, I'm not sure it's necessary to get into sexual orientation to resolve the case. I mean, if Sue loves Joe and Tom loves Joe, Sue can marry him and Tom can't. And the difference is based upon their different sex. Why isn't that a straightforward question of sexual discrimination?
So, Greg, there we heard the Chief Justice again questioning both sides somewhat skeptically. What, if you look at his history, you look at his temperament, you look at his desire often to have the court be less politicized, what's the argument that would say Justice Roberts would vote for more liberal law on same-sex marriage?
Well, unlike Justice Kennedy, Chief Justice Roberts actually devoted the vast majority of his questions towards being skeptical of same-sex marriage. So I don't think he's the same sort of likely vote. That said, he does care about the institution very deeply. If he's in the majority, it gives him a chance to write the opinion, perhaps shape it, perhaps keep it narrow. You did hear that last question about gender discrimination, which was a very interesting point from him. So he's not totally out of play for the same-sex marriage advocates, but he's going to be a much tougher get for them, and he would really be kind of a bonus vote that would give them a 6th vote in favor of same-sex marriage.
All right, so those are the only two guys who people think are really up in the air, but there are obviously opportunities for the other justices to talk. We want to listen to some sound from two of the ones who will vote in favor of liberalized same-sex marriage. First, Justice Ginsburg, and then Justice Sotomayor.
All of the incentives, all of the benefits that marriage affords would still be available. So you're not taking away anything from heterosexual couples. They would have the very same incentive to marry, all the benefits that come with marriage, that they do now.
How many married couples do fathers with the benefits or the requirements of marriage walk away from their children? And so it's not that the institution alone does it, and that without it, that father is going to stay in the marriage. He made a choice. I would say that it should be gender neutral. some mothers do the same thing. But my point is that I'm not sure how I get to the point that Justice Breyer is making. How does withholding marriage from one group, same-sex couples, increase the value to the other group?
Greg, you hear a lot of these arguments. Some of them are about technical matters or more abstract things. This is obviously a deeply personal thing and an emotional issue. Were the justices more emotional today in their colloquies with the lawyers than usual, or was it just a normal set of arguments?
In all honesty, they were less emotional than I might have expected. It was an argument that, given the stakes, you would have thought would have been very, very high energy. And there were some emotional moments, but a lot of it was, you sort of heard a little bit of a monotonous tone to some of those questions. There was some of that there, and there wasn't the fire. And then that may be because, from their standpoint, they see which way this is going, that they think that the past decisions strongly suggest this is going to be a 5-4 decision, or maybe 6-3, favoring same-sex marriage, and maybe that's why there wasn't the energy. But it did not have the passion that I've seen in cases even like health care.
Okay, let's take a quick listen now to someone representative of the other side ideologically, Justice Samuel Alito, who took aim at the pro-gay marriage arguments vociferously today.
It was well accepted within certain bounds. But did they have same-sex marriage in ancient Greece?
Yeah, I don't believe they had anything comparable to what we have, Your Honor. And we're talking about...
Well, they had marriage, didn't they?
Yeah, they had, yes.
And
they had some sort of marriage.
And they had same-sex relations, did they not?
Yes, and they also were able to...
People like Plato wrote in favor of that, did he not?
In favor of...
Same-sex, wrote approvingly of same-sex relationships, did he not?
I believe so, Your Honor.
So their limiting marriage to couples of the opposite sex was not based on prejudice against gay people, was it?
Greg, Justice Alito, Justice Scalia, Justice Thomas, we know how they're going to vote. Do you have a sense that they are resigned to the notion that they're about to lose?
There was that sense, I would say so. And one other point, just as I reheard those comments, one thing you did not hear in the courtroom today was you did not hear talk of moral disapproval of homosexuality. And in fact, you heard Justice Alito there talking about how it's been going on since at least ancient Greece. So that was, again, a bit of a different tone to the argument today.
Greg Stohr, our man at the Supreme Court, thanks a lot for being with us. Next, we have some presidential announcement news. We'll be right back.
Super fun weekend at Bernie's coming up. No, not that Bernie. According to our own Julie Bykowitz, on this Thursday, Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont will announce that he's officially running for president, and he's going to run as a Democrat. Expect a short statement this Thursday, and then in the next couple weeks at some point, a big kickoff in Vermont.
We also have a trifecta of programming notes. Tomorrow, Hollywood mega producer Brian Grazer joins us on the show. On Thursday, it's time for the Minister of Silly Walks, Monty Python's John Cleese. And on Friday, a conversation with Hustler publisher and First Amendment advocate Larry Flynt.
Until then, as they say at the state dinner tonight at the White House, sayonara.